how to focus for less stress using emotional intelligence. How to focus for less stress using emotional intelligence. I want to bring this topic up because stress is everywhere. I'm stressed. I see people around me stressed. In fact, tonight I got double stressed because something distressing happened and I was quite frustrated with certain things that had occurred. And wow, did I ever start to swirl? And it's a regular thing. It's part of life. It's part of being an entrepreneur, part of being a leader, a startup founder, you name it, stress, parent, family member, spouse, you name it, you're going to experience stress. And the question is not just how do we de-stress our lives, but how do we focus in a way that prevents stress from affecting us and actually lends itself to being a lot more productive? That's the question I want to talk about. Let's start and talk about what stress is. Stress defined is not good or bad. This is one of the mistakes that I see people often make is they make stress bad. Stress is actually a response from your body triggered by either your mind or perception of something or an external threat that your systems are out of homeostasis. So your body and you like to be in homeostasis, regulated, everything is okay, things are calm, there's no threat. But then when something happens, your body goes into a stress response, which is a freeze, flight, fight, or sometimes conform response because you want to get back into homeostasis. So it's very simple. You're walking down a dark alley in the middle of the night, and in the shadows, you think somebody's watching you. Your body goes into a stress response, which makes you want to run to safety, go into an area of light or something like that, go, run to your car and take action to get yourself back into homeostasis so that you're no longer under threat. Now, also what happens is because the human brain is developed and has, of all the mammals on the planet, has the largest neocortex, something interesting occur. You can actually think something and cause yourself a stress response. So imagine you're at work and you start thinking, oh my gosh, my company is going to fail. My startup is going to fail. Or someone's going to quit. Or let's say you're working in a startup and you have a boss and you think your boss is mad at you and you're going to get fired. Your body will go into a stress response because your mind is so powerful. You have enough cognitive capacity to cause a stress response. And that's the reason people have panic attacks or they start to feel that stress response manifest in their bodies. And weird things can happen at that moment in time. It's the exact same thing that happens when you have a superstar athlete that chokes. Everything's in line. And what they say is when you're in that stress response, you might have experienced this before, everything slows down and you can just start thinking, you see all these little details. Like they say, everything just slows down, and that's your body getting into that heightened, almost superpower sense of awareness to be able to navigate you out of that situation. Or sometimes you just fall over and you go limp, like you faint. And that's actually the freeze mechanism where your body will actually shut down to try and protect you. Your body does different things, but that can be triggered by what you think. So if the story in your head and you've got loops causes a stress response and you convince yourself that you're under threat in some way, well, your body can start to manifest that. And I remember, when I was young, I used to have, these sort of panic attacks, and I would, hyperventilate, and I actually caused myself an ulcer because I wasn't handling stress, even at a very young age. This was in high school. So you can imagine how much stress I was under to cause myself some ulcers. So what do we do about it? How do we focus, especially when we need to stay productive. And I'm going to give you some tips here and a process on how to do it using emotional intelligence. And so here we go. So what happens is one of the first things that occurs is stress happens because you are focused on what is called your circle of concern. And I'm taking this from the pages of Dr. Stephen Covey and other places that talk about, and there's actual brain science to back this up in terms of concept called locus of control. But the circle of concern is all the things that you could be worried about that are not necessarily in your control. So for example, you may think the economy is going to crash. The stock market is going to go down like, we're experiencing right now with geopolitical events and what's happening in the Ukraine. You're thinking, oh, all the economy is going to crash and we're going to go in recession. You can actually worry about that so much you cause a stress response for yourself. Same thing, somebody's going to have a poor opinion about you. Everyone's going to have a bad attitude towards you about something that is completely out of control, but you're just worried that, people aren't going to like you. You're not going to make friends, or I don't know, something catastrophic is going to occur, and that's your circle of concern. That can cause a stress response. What happens is you actually have a circle of control. So this is the circle of control, and typically it is much smaller than the circle of concern. The distance between the radius of your circle of control, not radius, diameter, circumference, I don't know, surface area of your circle of control and circle of concern, well, then that is going to cause more stress. So the more distance there is proportionate to how much stress you're going to experience, because we don't like feeling out of control. But if we're worried about things we cannot control, we start to feel hopeless and despair, and that leads to other deregulating emotions such as shame, toxic shame in particular. It starts off as worry, fear, and then it devolves all the way down to hopeless despair and a shame. So you want to ensure that your circle of control, you focus there, and it actually you only focus on what you can control of your circle of concern, is what I'm trying to say. But the question is how? How do we do this? Well, I'm going to augment this model a little bit and share something that I've learned is the circle of character. If you can focus on your circle of character, what happens is it starts to expand and push out your circle of control and starts to expand your circle of control to cover more of your circle of concern. But in fact, a lot of what happens is the opposite. Your circle of concern starts to shrink, which is really interesting. And so the more aligned and balanced those three circles are, the less stress you're going to experience. Now, that may seem like a little bit of neo-science in terms of like voodoo magic or what have you, but let me just relate it in terms of emotional intelligence. There are some core skills with emotional intelligence that you can use to help you with this. So what happens is, the first, starting in your circle of concern, you can use the skill of self-awareness. This is an emotional intelligence skill, and it can be learned. A lot of people think, oh, emotional intelligence, you have to be born with it. No, emotional intelligence is a skill. You can learn it, just like you can learn anything else when it comes to intelligence. And self-awareness is the ability to stop and literally step out of yourself and say, okay, what am I concerned about? And is it actually in my control? So you can stop, and some people call this metacognition. Think about your thinking and be self-aware. Okay, I am concerned about this and it is not in my circle of control. It is my circle of concern. In fact, it's way out there. And so many people, for example, when we were experiencing the pandemic, let's say, like, you can't control the actions of, other people. And if you are so concerned about the actions of other people and you're stressing yourself out, well, the emotional intelligence skill of self-awareness, step out and say, wait a second, I'm feeling very anxious and I'm concerned about things that are not in my control. So that's the first step, is to be aware of your circle of concern. So that's step number one. Okay. Step number one, become self-aware. Step number two, we're going to go inwards a little bit, right? And the next is self-regulation. So self-regulation is the ability to regulate yourself and get back to homeostasis. So let's say you're stressing out and you identify, wait a second, I am starting to feel concern beyond my circle of control, such as, okay, let's say you put your best foot forward in a proposal and there's nothing else you can do. So what is the point? You stop and think, I am concerned that the clients are going to accept this, become clients, the prospects are going to accept this. I can't control that. So now what do I do to self-regulate? What actions can I take? And so maybe you just take the night off or go for a walk or disrupt your behavior instead of sitting there stewing on it, because what will happen is your mind will go and it'll become this runaway train, a hijacked train, and it'll keep picking up speed. You know what happens in a hijacked train when it starts picking up speed? One car goes off the rails and you got a jackknife train, and it's an absolute catastrophe. It's a disaster. So you say, I'm just not going to worry about it. Go for a walk, or I'm going to go talk to somebody and I'm going to share what I'm feeling and get back to self-regulation. And it's an emotional intelligence skill for people to be aware of what works best for them for self-regulation. A lot of times when I get stressed out and I realize I'm in my circle of concern, beyond my circle of control, I start to feel that stress response. I'll go drink a huge glass of water because probably I'm not breathing correctly. I'll get up and drinking a whole bunch of water. I'm probably dehydrated and that's contributing to it. Or, I'll just take a break and look at nature and just drink a huge glass of water, or I'll gulp down a glass of water just to stop me from thinking about it. And what'll happen is my mind will be thinking about, oh my gosh, I'm drinking so much water, and it just helps. So there are many different things. I'll go talk to my wife and I'll just stop. I'll get up and I'll just say, honey, I'd like to share with something I recognize I'm stressing out about. And she'll just, I'll put my head in her lap and she'll, stroke my hair and say, there, it's going to be okay. And that just breaks the cycle or the pattern, that little loop in my mind and the story in my head, and allows me to self-regulate. Some people use exercise. I don't recommend using food. It can be a self-coping thing, and food has got addictive properties. So be careful what you use for self-regulation. In an appropriate way, get yourself to self-regulation. Then finally, you're going to go one step further in step 3, and this is your character, and you're going to work on self-responsibility. And ability, okay, there we go. All right, you can read that. Self-responsibility. Self-responsibility says, all right, and this is the ultimate locus of control, because you are working on what am I responsible for, and I'm only going to focus on that. So what can I do? What is my responsibility? So studies have shown that people, let's say students are taking a test, and the ones that say, doesn't matter what grade happens, it is my responsibility. I can always study more. I can learn to study better. I can just improve myself. I can learn the skills. They call this a growth mindset, that intellect and competence can be learned and can be trained, and we can take responsibility for it. Those students always perform better than the students that naturally think, I didn't get a good grade and it was a teacher's fault. because they didn't teach me correctly. I have a really bad teacher. And, oh, my boss made me work late and blaming everybody else. So the locus of control is external, and that creates lower performance. So it's been proven using science that those that naturally have an internal locus of control, that they take self-responsibility very seriously, are the ones that perform better. And guess what? If you can perform better, you can control more. If you can control more, guess what? Your circle of concern either shrinks, or your circle of control, you gain the influence and the ability to start to affect more things in your life that you normally felt powerless about or could not make any difference in. So you start to say, how am I going to take responsibility for this? Me, not blame everybody else. I'm going to let everybody else off the hook, but I'm not going to let myself off the hook. What can I do? I will take responsibility. In fact, I was speaking to a founder today, and he was telling me about 2 hires that did not work out. And we could talk all day long about the reason the hires didn't work out, because they lacked the competence, they lacked the social skills, there was mental health issues involved. And we could blame it all day long on the characteristics of these individuals, these hires. But the founder told me, that's my responsibility. I take full responsibility because I'm the one that made the choice to bring those people in. So what can I do to take more responsibility and learn for the next time? And I really admired that. That tells me that founder, that entrepreneur, is going to be extremely successful, because I've seen it go the other way around, where managers moan and groan about how everybody's incompetent around them, et cetera, and they can't find good people, and nobody's training the next generation of workers right, and people are entitled, millennials, and Generation Z, and boomers and zoomers, and et cetera, et cetera. So self-responsibility. So let's go through the steps again. First is step 1, use emotional intelligence, become aware, and say, I'm going to become self-aware. How am I in my circle of concern, beyond my circle of control? Just be aware of that. Step back, think about your thinking, and recognize it, acknowledge it. Then self-regulation, step 2, do what you need to do to regulate. And if you get good at this, guess what? It doesn't take much. Some people just take deep breaths, count to 10, meditate, what have you. And you can do all sorts of cool little tricks. I've taught people how to self-regulate just with the snap of their fingers. Then third step, how am I going to take responsibility for this? And the more you go through step 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, every time you feel stressed and you focus and you say, I feel stressed. Well, what's my 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3? The more you're going to develop the neural pathways, and the more regulated you're going to become, but the more character you're going to develop in these really great habits, these character-based habits that are just going to affect the rest of your life. So those are the 3 steps that you can use for emotional intelligence, using emotional intelligence to focus your stress. And just remember that stress is not a good or bad thing. All right. Stress is just a sign. So I like to think of stress as signposts on the road, on the journey. And let's say you're, driving your car and you start seeing some signposts, and the signposts are telling you these signs that you're stressed. Well, guess what? Now you can make some adjustments, but you want to read the signs. You don't want to make rash decisions. So emotions help you make the decisions, but they shouldn't dictate the decisions that you make, especially your stress. So don't make your stress bad. In fact, stress can be very appropriate and very, very helpful. So think about that. And remember, use those 3 steps and learn those emotional intelligence skills, and you will focus yourself so that you will de-stress your life and you'll be far more productive in everything that you do.